Hello, Conscious Capitalist listeners. We're pressing pause on our regular episodes for a special summer series. As a part of our summer takeover of the podcast, we'll be exploring the future of the conscious enterprise and dissecting what it will take for businesses to thrive in a world of radical uncertainty. We'll also dive into how conscious capitalism can build more agile, innovative, and resilient companies, and how leaders can reinvent their mindsets. If that sounds like something you need right now or interested in exploring, don't forget to join us. And if the series would be of interest to other CEOs, colleagues, or friends, send them to Apple or Spotify. What we're trying to do with our new podcast series is, in a sense, introduce you to why we think conscious enterprise of the future belongs to conscious capitalism. One of the first elements of that is understanding that we live in this time of radical uncertainty. And this has profound implications for how businesses think about their strategy. At our conference in Cincinnati, we're going to have the head of AI strategy for Google talk to us about what that looks like. Gopi Khalil will join us to talk about that as one of our keynote speakers. Today, we also have the opportunity to introduce you to Charles Conn, who has not only been in the purpose-driven world, both as chair of Patagonia, but also has been a senior partner at McKinsey and written about the topic of how to deal with strategy in a time of uncertainty. So in our first series, hello strategy, hello purpose-driven businesses, how do you build a competitive advantage through that combination? And joining me today as my co-host is someone who brings both heart and rigor to the conversation on conscious capitalism and conscious leadership, Kate Adams. Kate works with myself and the rest of the Conscious Capitalism team in leading our thought leadership and impact work. She spent her career at the intersection of purpose and performance. She's led purpose-driven organizations in the UK and also advised FTSE 100 and Fortune 500 companies on the people side of driving business performance. She has served on several boards, including her current role with Paralympics in Great Britain. And, as a result of that, she has all this wonderful regalia from the Paralympics in Paris, etc., where her commitment to human potential really shines through. Kate, it's great to have you with me today and great to have you as part of our team.
Thanks, Timothy.
Today, we have a special guest. He's a strategist, an investor, and a leader who spent his career at the intersection of purpose, innovation, and performance. Charles Conn is chair of the board at Patagonia and a longtime champion of values-based leadership in both business and philanthropy. He's best known for guiding organizations through moments of high uncertainty, and he's a former CEO of the Rhodes Trust. He helped globalize the fellowship, reorient it towards solving some of the world's toughest challenges. Earlier, he co-founded City Search, advised leaders at the Gates Foundation, at Nature Conservancy, and was, on top of all of that, a senior partner at McKinsey and Company. For today's discussion, he's also the co-author of The Imperfectionists, a powerful call to rethink strategy in an era of radical uncertainty. And he's also written about making decisions, good decisions in the context of not having full information and data. He models a style of leadership that's both intellectually rigorous and deeply human. Hello, Charles.
Hello, Timothy. It's good to see you again. Kate, nice to see you too.
Well, welcome to our program today. And who better to begin the discussion of how do we deal with this idea of radical uncertainty? We live in an era right now when we not only have this incredible uncertainty at the geopolitical level, tariffs are on, tariffs are not, what's going to happen to supply chains, is there going to be a recession, not going to be a recession, US dollar up, down, enormous change and disruption there. But we also face radical uncertainty from a business model point of view over the next 5 years. Whether it's AI, which is the hot topic of the moment, or blockchain, or quantum computing, or nanotechnology, or robotics, or life sciences and biotech, or the combination of these things, over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see enormous changes in business models. And it's unlike anything we've seen, certainly in our lifetime and maybe ever in the business world, in terms of this incredible, radical uncertainty. So it's in that context that we turn to you, Charles, and say, you've written books on strategy and decision making. How are these two disciplines being challenged today in these kind of uncertain times, both for leaders and for the organizations that they lead?
We have never seen anything like this before. Of course, the last 100 years, we have also been in an incredibly changeful period compared to all the human history periods before that. But it's ramping at a rate that I think is previously unimaginable. And what I think it means is that our ways of thinking about business, our ways of structuring the organizations by which we prosecute business, and especially the way we think about strategy, decision-making, and how we align our teams against those things all have to change and will never be the same again. Our models before now are actually based on 19th century military models. That's how we think about and talk about strategy, and our organizations look like armies, right? When we draw these structures, right? You could put in CEO and head of strategy, or you could put in general so-and-so and captain of such and such, right? And that analogy may have made sense in a world where you had large oligopolistic heavy industries that changed only slowly. And there were very few new entrants, and the players regarded each other in ways that were sort of well-known, and strategy moved relatively incrementally. All that way of thinking is out the window. So thinking of strategy as something that you do once a year or even once every 5 years, the 5-year strategic plan, is literally absurd today. And thinking of strategy as something that's reserved for the C-suite is just as absurd. It can't be the case. Strategy has to be done in a much more fluid way, accepting the level of uncertainty, and it needs to be pushed forward into the front lines where people are really encountering the market and customers.
Well, I love the way you framed that. And, we could use the war analogy and say, look what's happened just in Ukraine over the
Right.
last 2.5 years. You went from trench warfare to drone versus anti-drone versus the kill zone, like nobody, massive change very, very quickly. And to your point, our notion of strategy needs to evolve and change in how we do it.
Yeah.
And what I'm amazed by is, one, people waking up to that. Because I'm having discussions with executives right now who are saying, I don't even know how to do my budget for next year. Like we're in the budget season. We're trying to do our budget for 2026. We have
What do
no
I do?
clue. What do I
Yeah.
do? Supply chain tariffs, right? How do I factor that in? Recession, not a recession, interest rates up, down. Really, really difficult, let alone try to say, hey, that's relatively simple to what's our strategy and how it's going to evolve. And I think underneath is the practice of strategy has huge organizational and leadership shifts implied in it. Because as you said, you need to push it closer to the front line, closer to the customer, the higher approach in China, zero distance to the customer.
Right.
Wow. Okay. That massive organizational shift.
Right.
I have a sense people haven't woken up to that part at all. Intellectually, what you just said, they can sort of buy that. But boy, the gap between that and the practice of what it means organizationally. Oof.
And Charles, are you able to say a bit more about where organizations that are practicing this, what is it that they're doing that sets them apart?
So, and there are a number that I think are doing amazing things. So I'll make just a couple of observations, not many, but the best organizations are radically transforming where they think strategy comes from, right? And so maybe having C-suite, top-down organization for the creation of values, for the promulgation of principles on which we operate, and those should be relatively simple and straightforward and easy to follow, but pushing down the actual thinking about innovation, investment, and strategy to the people who are closest to the customer, and with rare exceptions, right? And those exceptions, I think they were set out very well by the leadership of Amazon, which is when there's doors that you can't go back through, when there are bets that are existential for the company, those you do need to push up. But every other kind of decision we should think about probabilistically rather than with certainty. And we should think about the learning steps that people make down closest to the coalface as great, whether the actual experience is positive or negative. And that's very hard for organizations. Organizations want to reward success, and therefore steps in strategy that don't work are usually punished rather than admired and promulgated. And Kate, I mean, the other thing is that you need a very different kind of organization to make this process work, right? You need an organization that's frankly difficult to draw, because just drawing boxes on a page doesn't actually capture the process by which people actually work together in small, relatively fluid, cross-functional groups that form and reform to deal with particular challenges or particular innovation opportunities.
Yeah, I like to call this sort of, Charles, what we would refer to as freedom within a framework.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, the
Exactly.
new role of the C-suite is to create a framework.
And the
It-
framework
our
has to be values-based, right? Because
values and our purpose, and purpose becomes really important. This is our purpose. This is the impact we're trying to have. Here are the values that you can't. Now, we may have some value creation hypotheses about how we're going to create competitive advantage.
yeah,
And, you know, that's part of but then within that, we have to give you freedom to sort of
Right.
operate, freedom to experiment, freedom to make mistakes.
but it does mean that toolkit that we equip everyone in the organization with needs to be relatively small, right? It needs to be a set of a purpose, a set of values about how we do what we do, and then maybe a this, not this about things that in this organization we do and don't do.
Yeah.
And everything else really does need to be open to experimentation, except in the rare circumstances where we have to make bet the farm decisions.
And Charles, just thinking about your role in Patagonia, I mean, one of the possibly most famous purpose-led organizations in the world and world-class at it. How does this notion of the always-on strategy and then being purpose-driven come together?
Yeah, and I think in Patagonia, it is hand in glove. It has to be. And, you know, it comes from Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, who didn't come to building companies because he wanted to make money. He wanted to make the best gear. He's a reluctant businessman, as he describes himself. He is the original experimentalist. So he never came to this with military ideas about strategy. He came to it by looking at the gear that they used to do rock climbing and other outdoor pursuits in the 50s and 60s and said, I bet I can make that better. And so the ethic of the company is an experimentalist ethic. Let's prototype something, take it into the field, break it, take it back into the bench and make it better again. And that is guided very much to the point that both of you have been making by a very clear set of values, right? And those values are partly business values. We make the best gear, but also, as you know, deeply embedded environmental values, right? We do the least harm. We use the power of business to solve the environmental crisis. And since 2018, we have a very simple mission that helps guide your every decision, which is we're in business to save the home planet. So when you're down on the front line and you're trying to make that backpack work better or that ice axe work better or design a new sleeping bag, you know, you've got all of the experimentalist toolkit and you're guided by the value of, is what I'm making likely to help us be in business to save the home planet? And if it isn't, you should rethink what you're doing.
Well, what I think the natural conclusion of that becomes one of, listen, you and I both started our careers as strategists, right? And it was, we're going to do this analytic stuff. We're going to come up with the answer and what we now see as competitive advantage is really organizational and cultural. It's going to lie in the process and in the type of culture and organization that you create, because
Right.
it's a strategy making organization rather than a set of highly trained analytical people coming in and analyzing the problem. Right now it's experimenting and it's having that ability to do those things. And that's a tremendous shift in our business thinking. And I think that you just highlighted that beautifully by sort of saying this was the core operating principle of Patagonia. But now we have other companies that are going to have to move in this direction.
Yeah.
And that's different.
Well, and I think what you just said is like, we put our old selves out of business, right? Those jobs don't really exist anymore. There are people who are still called chief strategy officers.
Yeah.
It's the shortest tenure of anybody in the C-suite. They're the least happy people in the C-suite, right? Because
Thought the chief purpose officer had that role, but never mind.
Well, that's a toughie too, right? But I think that's right, which is when you, and it's funny, people will often say in Patagonia, like, who do I talk to about purpose? What's the role? So talk to anybody. Talk to anybody. Because if you can't talk to anybody, it doesn't work. There can't be a high priest of purpose, just like there shouldn't be a high priest or priestess of strategy.
It's really interesting listening to you speaking there. What come to my mind is this need for experimental learning cultures. How do you get your full workforce, the entire breadth, depth, width of your workforce, curious and learning all the time? That feels like such a shift from the model you described at the beginning, like a military model of instruction and delivery, into you are constantly redesigning. And that's a huge shift in people. And I'm curious about how we need people to do that. And in a world of AI, how AI is playing into that.
Wow. I mean, some of my favorite words you're just using, like curiosity, I think is it is a fundamental value of this kind of new organization. Trust is really important, right? Which goes hand in hand with kind of purpose-driven organizations, because we really do have to trust folks. We can't have command and control where we're checking people. We actually have to free people. We have to, unleash people to do the right thing to help build great businesses that are also ethical and sustainable. AI can help, but the good news so far is that AI is actually not very good at logic, and it's not very. It isn't, and it's not very creative yet. These incredibly expensive large language models are basically next word prediction models, and they're not very good at showing their work. And if you give them logical tasks that they're not trained in, they're not very good at that. There's a wonderful new paper coming out of Apple. Even a children's game like putting different sized discs on a spindle, once you get to 5 or 6 discs, it's too difficult. So there's a critical role for people, especially around creativity and especially around applying a kind of human-centered logic of problem solving. That said, Kate, I don't think there's anything that's easy about this. Letting 1,000 flowers bloom sounds easy, but the truth is we still need to meet objectives. We still need to train juniors to become middle and senior people. We still need to say this isn't good enough, right, when it's not good enough. And I think people have this sense that it's sort of easy to work in a purpose-driven organization. No, it's hard to work in a purpose-driven organization because you have to show up every day and do the things that need to be done, not just the tasks your boss told you to do, right?
Yeah.
You've removed that ability to sort of sit back and, turn the crank. I remember learning this so many years ago in McKinsey, and I was a brand new manager, and I said, I don't really know about managing people. What do you do? I said to my boss, and he said, he laughed. He said, give them the whip. They'll do a much better job than you ever could. And it always struck with me, like when you really free people and engage them in the work, right? You don't need the old model, but you need to be incredibly inspirational.
So Charles, what I love about this is this frames the opportunity and the challenge.
Right.
And I remember way back in the 90s when you and I were still cubs, and and the answer was that 70 or 80% of transformation efforts don't work.
Yeah.
And then I fast forward to, Bain's still doing that study, and it's still 70 or 80% of change and transformation efforts don't work. So we haven't learned a whole heck of a lot in 30 years. And yet now we face one of the largest transformations, and that is being forced on organizations.
That's right.
If they're going to build a competitive advantage and survive. And, us consultants, we're good at giving advice. So what advice, Charles? What's different this time about the transformation that a CEO needs to be, and the C-suite, because it's still got to start there. If they don't see the need to make this change, and if they and their board are not having this dialogue, it isn't going to happen. And are you seeing anything start to shift in that way?
Yeah, I think we are. And I think, you name some of the places where we're seeing it. I still think it's on the periphery. It's a Chinese company you heard about that's doing things radically differently. There are a number of American companies that are changing their organization structures. But I think it's still just on the horizon. I think we're just about to go through one of the biggest, periods of disruption that we've ever experienced. You're already seeing it, right? That in almost every industry that you operate in today, the likely disruptor to your position in that industry is coming from outside.
Mm.
It's coming from a new AI native startup company whose name you barely heard of, or it's coming from one of these super competitors, an Amazon, a Google, an Apple, or somebody like that. And I think all the old ways of thinking about what it means to get up and lead and manage an organization are going to need to change given that context. And I think it's enormously difficult. I really do. I think our leaders are going to have to continue to inspire organizations rather than just give quantitative targets. And I think we are going to have to rethink, and we mentioned this a second ago, we may still have organization structures, but much more interesting will be how we solve business problems together in fluid teams that take advantage of new technologies and are not afraid to disrupt our own business rather than be disrupted by outsiders.
Wow.
And that goes against everything about the best companies that we thought of in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s.
And are you able to share anything about what's kind of top of mind? You on the board, and taking Patagonia as an example, what do you see as the main things you're focusing on with this disruption coming?
It's something we struggle and we fight every day. And I don't mean to suggest that it's easy in Patagonia either. That would be incorrect. We have the great benefit of still having this inspirational founder, and very present in the company, which gives a great centering force to the company. We have the great benefit of the fact that all of the profitability of Patagonia goes to purpose, and the purpose that the Patagonia founders, when they gave away their shares, was to fight the environmental crisis. So we're aligned in that way. But I don't think we're immune from the challenge of, we're in a large number of businesses. We compete against other very difficult competitors in those businesses. We're not a technology-centered business. We're a value-centered business, but we will need to adopt some of these new technologies. So all of this is real for Patagonia today. Yeah. We have a terrific leader of the company, CEO of the company. He has a terrific team that he works with day to day. And every single day we wake up and deal with the same questions that everyone else does. So, we have to worry, just like every other business, about what's our gross margin. We have to worry about SG&A. We have to worry about the pace of innovation. We're not, purpose means we have alignment about what we're trying to do. Purpose means our customers trust that we're doing the right thing. Purpose means our customers are actually willing to give us the benefit of the doubt as we work stuff out. But that's about it. Like all the rest of it, we have to face, like everybody else.
Well, I think what that raises for me is, we've had our 4 pillars of conscious capitalism, right? Purpose, stakeholders, culture, and leadership. Underneath that, we've always said, if you don't have a good business model, you don't have a good business operating model, conscious capitalism is not going to save you. We can help you, a good company, become a great company. But when you bring that up, what I think is also interesting is even the notion of a business operating model needs to shift, because your business model is got to be adaptive and agile to these rapidly changing things that are going on. So even if you're paying attention to SG&A, even if you're looking at your margins and your supply chain and how that's affecting your margins, you've also at the same time got to be innovating in there and changing that almost real time, almost constantly.
That's right.
And so again, we come back to a new capability that an organization's got to have, which is an agile, innovative business model and operating system. And if you don't have that kind of agility in your operating system
Right.
and in your culture, then it's going to be really, really difficult to manage this.
And, I think we come back to where we started, though, which is the best way for that to be true is to be guided by a very clear goal of what you're trying to do in the world. And then to have relatively straightforward principles about how we do what we do, right? And here, in Patagonia, we're driven by experimentalist innovation,
Yeah.
right? We're not driven by fashion, for example. We love incredible new technologies and fabrics that, help us do human-powered outdoor pursuits better, but we don't do ones that have forever chemistries or that damage watersheds. We don't use dyes where those would hurt fish, for example. And so there's very clear lines that are drawn. And we have a very deep-seated principle against bureaucratic decision-making. And that's hard, right? Because every organization, especially values-based ones, have people who become sort of checkers that you're doing it the way that we do it. But the more people you have checking that the way we're doing it, the longer it takes to make a decision, right? And so somehow you have to be alive to your set of principles as you solve an ever-changing set of business problems, which you just described.
I'm really interested in that decision-making element and how the purpose can help guide the strategic decisions you're now making in rapid, dynamic ways. I think you've articulated that beautifully in how that kind of North Star or whatever people see that can really guide you to be able to go faster.
It really helps with the this, not this, right? Because at any given moment, you're always faced with a big, nasty hornet's nest of opportunity and challenge. And, in a place like Patagonia, the answer is like, well, we do not do it this way. Like, we are not going to compromise these things. We do things, wherever possible, we are experimentalist, and, we love to design, break, build, redesign, right? And so those kind of things run through the organization. And I do think that they help simplify problems and make decision-making faster when we're at our best.
And I also think the thing that people often don't understand about Patagonia is, I remember, early on in the conscious capitalism journey, we were invited to spend a day and a half at Patagonia up in Ventura. And the thing that hit me at the time, and I don't know if it's still true, but they were claiming that we had basically about 100 applicants for every job opening in Ventura.
Absolutely.
And it was like, so let me understand that. It's almost harder to get a job at Patagonia than it is to get into Harvard, right? Is that what you're telling me? And they were saying, yeah, sort of. And so the thing that people forget, I think, are two things about Patagonia that I think are incredibly important. You have the best people, like it's not just that we've created this structure
Right.
but we have the best people, because this virtuous cycle that occurs as you're seen as being a purpose-driven, values-driven organization. People want to work there. They want to have meaning. And that gives you an advantage. So the decision makers you've got are just maybe smarter, better people.
Well, I think that's right. And it's so important that you point that out, that best people is actually endogenous, not exogenous to the system. Best people comes because there's a market. And it's just why, the resurgence of an old-fashioned way of thinking about capitalism isn't going to win, right? Because the truth is, we compete in the market for investors. We compete in the market for staff. We compete in the market for communities that want us to be in their communities, right? And if you act in that old way, which is I'm operating just inside the legal boundaries of what it means to be a company, and within those, all I care about is maximizing profit, which was set out in a 1970 article by Milton Friedman. In fact, it was in the New York Times, not the Wall Street Journal, interestingly enough. The purpose of companies. If you operate that way, you will not get licensed to operate inside good communities. You will not attract the best people. And your investors know that you're not actually aiming for the long term.
Yeah.
Because anyone who wants to build a company, we're 52 years in at Patagonia. If you want to be 102 years in as Patagonia, you have to aim for the horizon, not for the next quarter, right? If you aim for the next quarter, you will find that you have stubbed your toe.
Well, that you just raised a really interesting point is what does it mean to be aiming for the horizon in a fast changing environment? Okay.
Right.
What does that mean, Charles? I mean, I hear the words.
Yeah. Strategy is shorter, but the horizon's bigger. How do you reconcile?
But what it means is, what goes around comes around. So you can't do things that jack up short-term profit, which damage communities, which exploit your workforce, which con your customers, right? And which damage the planet that gives us the ultimate license to operate. All these things must come together in the end, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise we're not leaving a planet for our kids that we would want to leave for our kids. And there's nothing woke about this, right? I think people think that conscious capitalism means woke capitalism, or it means that everyone's sitting around in a circle, apologizing. This is not the case. Conscious capitalism can be highly competitive capitalism. Probably needs to be.
I remember the other thing that I remember from that visit to Patagonia was we want to make the best raincoat in the world, and the best for the planet, There was a competitive edge there, and it's a high performance culture. It's not don't underestimate and don't confuse purpose and values with not having high standards for performance.
I was in a board meeting in April with Yvonne, and Yvonne took our very best jacket, raincoat, mountain climbing jacket, the pinnacle garment, $700 item, and he destroyed it. We've been trying to improve, we've been improving this jacket every year for 30 years, and he took it apart. He literally took it apart. And, people forget that. So in Patagonia, high praise, that's good. We can do better.
Yeah.
That's high praise.
And it's so important. I think over the years, we've seen some very purpose-driven organizations that haven't made it because maybe they haven't had that always-on strategy. They haven't managed to overcome the level of disruption. It could be for many reasons, but it is fiercely competitive to keep the business high-performing and have this purpose. And I guess, it's how this purpose supports businesses to innovate and evolve, and very much how that meaningful work brings a workforce that's able to experiment and innovate, and be able to have long horizons of success.
And to hold themselves to high account, right? I mean, I think that's part of it too. And that's why these are not easy places to work. They're hard places to work because you hold yourself to purpose and you hold yourself to really good business results, or you don't get to keep playing. I often think of Portlandia, the sort of sitcom, right? In one of the episodes, there's a soap company that's making deodorant. It doesn't work at all, but it's perfectly environmentally sensitive. Well, that's fun and it's funny, but that doesn't work,
no.
Right? And so our raincoats have to work.
Yeah.
And when you're at 27,000 feet or whatever, and it's raining and sleeting, you could die if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
They may be simple in the sense that purpose is clear, but they're hard in the sense that to do well in those environments, to satisfy your customers' needs, to do the right thing by the planet with how you source things, to do the right thing by your customers, to do that in a way that's affordable. That's hard. That's a triangle that's hard.
And given in this radical uncertainty that's getting harder, I just wanted to focus a bit on the type of leaders we need, Charles, up ahead. You've worked with many remarkable leaders over the years. What type of leader is required for this new sort of business operating system we're going into?
I mean, so first of all, I don't think there's one size fits all. I mean, I don't want to say that. And I've seen all kinds of different personal styles, but I do think that there are some commonalities that cut across the styles. And, this won't surprise anyone on this conversation or anybody listening, right? Because it's consistent with what we've been saying, which is the people who run these organizations have to be deeply authentic, right? The slightest bit of hypocrisy in these kind of organizations is 10 times worse than in normal crappy organizations, right? Where hypocrisy is tolerated. They have to be carriers of values, and they have to be, propounders of values. And they have to do that in a way that's not scary, not just scary, but also inspiring, right? And I think that's hard. I think it often means being gentle on people, but hard on ideas. I think it means fighting hierarchy and bureaucracy wherever you can, even though some of those senior people are, of course, absolutely critical to your organization, but really pushing through to frontline folks wherever you can. I do think it means being respectful of those frontline people, though, who are still learning in their own journeys. So not pushing them ahead of where they, can actually operate at a moment in time. It's a very hard thing to get right.
And the development of those leaders. I mean, because again, we have a history of developing captains and now we're pivoting and we're sort of saying there's a new type of leader we need to be developing and evolving.
Right.
And it
so
doesn't
you go
happen
back,
by magic.
Very sensibly, you go back to this military language, right? Because that was, this is our objective. Colonel, you then propound that objective to the people underneath you and they to the people underneath them. And then, of course, and you pointed out, like, even in war, that's not true anymore, right? Yeah. Because all the rules change, and we were seeing that in conflict too, and and awful new technologies being developed. Those are also being upended. But we have to leave that behind, and we really do. Those of us who started off in the strategy and the high priest roles and strategy organizations, we need to let that go. We need to roll up our sleeves and work, hand in hand with the folks who are encountering customers. When I first worked in software organizations, you'd go to the high priests there who were the designers, the architects of software. And when something didn't work, they would say user error. Okay, not acceptable, right? There's no such thing as user error. That's designer error.
Yeah.
Right? And we have to upend all that and democratize, not because it's a woke value, because it's the only way to be successful.
So, Charles, last thoughts. One thing that you're optimistic about that's going to emerge from this crucible of change that we're coming into.
I'm really optimistic about this young generation that's coming through. I think that they're fluid. I think they're fluid thinkers. I think they're incredibly creative. I think they will find ways to have fun as we solve these difficult problems. And I don't think we need to approach this next set of challenges with white knuckles. I think we should approach these challenges with open palms. And I think we need to find joy in our work, even as we face rapid change. No, especially as we face rapid change. Is that crazy? Maybe it's crazy.
No, it's brilliant. It's optimistic. We've got to be optimistic in the end. We believe in a benevolent universe, remember? Charles, thank you so much for your time today. A fascinating discussion at a fascinating time in history. Thank you for being the icon that you are and for being so thoughtful on this really, really important subject.
Yeah.
What a pleasure to spend time with both of you. I loved every minute of it.
Very cool. Thank you, Charles.
Pleasure.
And for you, our listeners, we want to invite you to a special event we're hosting in Cincinnati on October 23rd, 24th, and 25th, The Future of the Conscious Enterprise. The whole point of what we've spoken today with Charles is that you need to be preparing now for a really radically uncertain future. That's the core that we're going to be addressing at that conference. So if you want more information, please go over to consciouscapitalism.org/future25. That's consciouscapitalism, one word, .org/future25. The future is coming faster than you think, more than ever. Join us and be prepared.